Welcome to this explainer on one of the most legendary military encounters in human history, the Battle of Thermopylae. Now, if you're like most people, your mind probably jumps straight to those Hollywood blockbusters, right? Roaring Spartans in slow motion, lots of leather, and heavily stylized mythological combat. But today, we're going to bypass all those Hollywood myths. We are going to dissect what actually happened on that narrow strip of Greek coastline back in 480 BC. We're going to break down the true anatomy of a last stand. To truly grasp why this ancient clash still resonates so strongly with us today, we have to start with a really fundamental question. What makes someone willing to fight a battle they know, for a fact, they are mathematically guaranteed to lose? I mean, to understand our modern Western concepts of heroism, duty, and self-sacrifice, we have to look back over 2 millennia. We have to ask why anyone would willingly stand their ground against literally impossible odds, especially when running away was still an option. Let's dive right into the sheer scale of this thing, because the mathematics of the danger here were absolutely terrifying. We're talking about an allied Greek force of roughly 7,000 men marching out to block a rapidly advancing Persian army. Now, ancient historians like Herodotus famously claimed the Persians numbered in the millions, but modern scholars actually estimate this massive force to be somewhere between 120,000 and 300,000 soldiers. Just take a second to process that math. Even going by the absolute most conservative estimates, the Greeks were outnumbered by at least 17-1. It was a complete statistical nightmare. So how exactly did they get to this point? Well, 10 years after a pretty humiliating defeat at the Battle of Marathon, the Persian Empire, now under the rule of King Xerxes I, launched a massive, heavily coordinated invasion. Xerxes was absolutely determined to conquer all of Greece, and the logistical effort behind this was just staggering. We are talking about mind-boggling engineering feats here. They built massive pontoon bridges across the Hellespont just to march armies over the sea, and literally dug canals through peninsulas to safely transport his vast military machine directly into the heart of the Greek mainland. You have to realize, this conflict was a clash of 2 entirely different worlds. On one hand, you had the Persian Empire. This was a centralized, sprawling superpower with vast resources and a multinational army that relied on sheer mass and combined arms to just crush its enemies. Against them stood the Greek city-states, or polis. These were fiercely independent, autonomous cities, think Athens and Sparta, plagued by deep, deep internal rivalries. But they were temporarily bound together by a unified citizen-soldier mentality, and they were desperately fighting for their very survival. So, to neutralize those overwhelming Persian numbers, the Greeks had to find a geographic equalizer, and they chose to make their stand at Thermopylae, which translates to the Hot Gates. This was a tiny, narrow coastal pass in central Greece. In antiquity, at its narrowest point, it measured only about 15 meters wide. Imagine standing in a space just 50 feet across. You've got sheer, vertical, impassable cliffs on one side of you, and the sea on the exact opposite side. It was incredibly claustrophobic, but that was exactly the point. It was the ultimate geographical bottleneck, where the enemy's massive army simply couldn't fan out to surround them. This geographic bottleneck was really the cornerstone of a broader pan-Hellenic strategy that was just brilliant in its simplicity. The plan was to block the Persian land advance right at this narrow pass, with Spartan King Leonidas I commanding the coalition land forces. They even went ahead and rebuilt an old, crumbling Phocian wall across the pass for a little added defense. But this wasn't happening in isolation. At the exact same time, the Athenian-led fleet was blocking the Persian navy at the Straits of Artemisium, making sure the land army's flank was totally protected from the sea. Now, in a claustrophobic, 15-meter-wide space, sheer numbers don't matter nearly as much as gear. And here, the Greeks had massive tactical advantages. The Greek hoplite was essentially a walking tank. They were outfitted in heavy bronze armor and classical helmets, completely outclassing the light cloth armor of the Persians. They carried these huge, heavy, bronze-faced shields called the hoplon, which would just crash devastatingly against the lighter Persian wicker shields. And crucially, the Greeks wielded the long dory spear, which gave them a massive tactical advantage in reach over the bows and shorter spears of the Persian infantry. The Greeks maximized all this heavy equipment by utilizing the famous phalanx formation. If you don't know, the phalanx was a tightly closed military formation of heavily armed infantry standing shoulder to shoulder. Their heavy shields literally overlapped. They interlocked to protect not just themselves, but the die standing next to them, all while their long spears protruded forward. It formed this impenetrable, bristling wall of bronze and wood that the lightly armored Persian forces simply could not break through. And listen, this wasn't just a series of elegant movie-style one-on-one duels. it was something far more visceral and terrifying. They utilized a tactic called othismos. I want you to think of the most brutal, claustrophobic rugby scrum imaginable, but with heavy bronze and lethal weapons. It was a highly disciplined, brutal tactical maneuver of advancing and retreating. Basically, a massive, coordinated push and shove designed to literally crush the breath out of the enemy and break through their lines using the sheer collective weight of the formation, before quickly locking right back into their defensive wall. And you know what? This tactical superiority worked flawlessly for 2 full days. On day 1, the Greeks easily repelled wave after wave of initial Persian assaults, grinding their advance to an absolute halt. Day 2 brought more of the exact same, with the Greeks even defeating Xerxes' elite, heavily romanticized shock troops, the Immortals. The Persians were suffering massive casualties while the Greeks comfortably held the line. But then, tragedy struck, setting the stage for the catastrophic events of day 3. The turning point wasn't some kind of failure in Greek tactics. No, it was a betrayal. A local shepherd named Ephialtes, who was hoping for a rich reward from the Persian king, revealed a hidden mountain path called the Unmatched path. This treacherous little route allowed a Persian unit to march through the night, bypass the choke point entirely, and position themselves to attack the Greek defenders from behind. Just like that, in one single stroke, the impregnable bottleneck had been broken. Recognizing the deadly trap they were in, King Leonidas actually ordered the main army to retreat so they could live to fight another day. But he consciously chose to stay behind. He needed to hold the pass and buy the rest of Greece precious time to escape. And honestly, the true history here is far more fascinating than the myth. It wasn't just 300 Spartans. 700 incredibly loyal Thespians fiercely refused to leave, demanding to fight alongside the Spartans. They were joined by 400 Thebans and up to 900 Helots. This was a true, genuine coalition sacrifice. It's right from this desperate, final moment that we get one of history's most iconic phrases. According to historical lore, when the Persians demanded that the vastly outnumbered Spartans and their allies just surrender their weapons, Leonidas gave a defiant 2-word reply in Greek, "Malon labe," which translates to "come and take them." It absolutely perfectly encapsulated their unyielding ethos. They knew they were going to die. There was no way out. But they were going to make the enemy pay dearly for every single inch of ground. Now, this wasn't just an empty, suicidal gesture. This delay was actually a strategic masterstroke. By staying and fighting to the very last man, Leonidas and his coalition gave the Greek alliance the precious time they desperately needed. It allowed the city of Athens to completely evacuate its citizens to safety, and it also allowed the Greek navy to reposition, eventually luring the Persian fleet into a deadly trap and completely turning the tide of the entire war at the decisive naval battle of Salamis. The defenders fought to the absolute death, pushing out into the wider part of the pass in a final, brutal frenzy of combat. Their ultimate sacrifice was immortalized in a famous epitaph by the ancient poet Simonides, which was carved right into a monument at the site. It reads, "Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie." With those haunting words, a devastating military defeat was forever transformed into a story of eternal glory. So when we look at Thermopylae in retrospect, the truth is actually so much more compelling than the fiction. Modern pop culture so often reduces the battle to this mythological legacy of just 300 invincible Spartan supermen standing entirely alone against a monster army. But the historical reality, a unified Pan-Hellenic coalition of 7,000 men initially, using brilliant geographical strategy, superior heavy armor, and profound psychological discipline to hold off an empire, that is a far richer and, frankly, more incredible story of human endurance. Which brings us to our final thought for this explainer. Over 2 millennia later, this ancient clash continues to shape our society's deepest ideals of courage. It leaves us with a really provocative question to consider. Does the ideal of selfless sacrifice for a greater cause, an ideal forged in the blood and bronze of the hot gates, still define our understanding of heroism today? Take a moment to think about that, and consider how the echoes of 480 BC still resonate all around us in our modern world.